going to go ahead and get started. Why don't we do just like a brief sort of introduction of yourselves and what you have on your farm and what things are like. We'll start there. I wouldn't mind getting a little feedback from the online participants because we're a little closer now to the mic. So I want to make sure that we're not saturating it out and that it all sounds strange. So Annie will keep an eye on that. But when we go ahead and start and just talk about what life is like on your farm.
Okay, great. My name is Dee Boyce, and I have a farm called Root Down Farm in Pescadero. We pasture raise chickens, turkeys, ducks, and pigs, all for meat, so no eggs. And I guess I'm going to be more specific with this group. We do heritage turkeys, standard bronze, Delaware chickens for meat, as well as a freedom reindeer. And then for ducks, we've done a few different breeds, but have landed on like a hybrid chicken that we get from Metro. And yeah, like I said, they're all on pasture and just entering my 6th year. And it's currently myself and one full-time employee. And we sell the majority of our products to at farmers markets, direct to consumer. A few restaurants, but for the most part, farmers markets.
I'm Leslie Braben, and my husband and I have a 400-acre livestock ranch in Bodega that we started from scratch. And we have Scottish Highland cattle and some Angus crosses that we do 100% grass-fed beef. We have Kiko goats for goat meat. We raise meat ducks and Emden geese. And then we also do certified organic duck eggs. And we sell at a couple of farmers markets. We have a farm stand on the property, and we also do shipping.
I'm Joy Dulcini. Our farm we call Farmer Joy. We started with chickens, and then we moved into ducks. We also raise beef and pork. We sell all of our beef and pork direct to consumer at farmers markets and through an email list. And then we also sell most of our chicken eggs at the farmers market or to home delivery customers. And then we sell duck eggs mostly wholesale to some, we have like a restaurant and a butcher shop, and then a couple like online farmers markets that we sell to. I think that's it.
So I'd just like to introduce myself. Sorry for being a few minutes late. So my name's Maurice Pateski. I'm from the School of Veterinary Medicine. And I'd like to thank everyone for being here, especially our members of our roundtable. The goal of these roundtables is really to, I think, have a discussion and for farmers to be able to kind of listen to some of the challenges and opportunities that this segment of the poultry industry has. It's kind of one of the areas of poultry that doesn't always get a lot of attention, especially from the university. And I'm really hoping that we can, for the people that are in the room and the people that are joining via Zoom, that you guys can ask questions at the end of the hour, probably about an hour from now. We'll save our questions for then. So people on Zoom, if you can start just writing in on the chat box, or just saving up your questions for later. So one thing I wanted to point out to people, so this is a beginning farmer, this grant is supported by the USDA and specifically by the Beginning Farmer, Rancher, and Development Program. And I really want to stress the beginning part. USDA's definition of beginning is anyone that has been in farming for less than 10 years. So those are still pretty experienced people, but in the spirit of kind of following that beginning word, I'm wondering if kind of each one of you can kind of think back to, when you were first starting, when this was just an idea, and to the people that are listening, if you could kind of describe what the process was like, because I think you guys understand this better than probably anybody else, but these are really hard things to start. You have to be a businessman or businesswoman. You have to be a farmer. Some of you might have been born into it. Some of you maybe not. You guys probably had to pivot at some level to answer some of the marketing challenges that are going on. And I would imagine when you started, things are much different than they are right now. And I'm wondering if each one of you can kind of just think of one thing or two things that you would try to pass on to, kind of beginning people that are listening. So you want to start, Dee?
Yeah, sure. I think when I started, I was really naive, and that I think actually helped me out, but I definitely do not recommend it. I think I went in like bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, like I love farming, I love working with animals, I love all of those pieces, and I started it with a business partner who has since moved on, and he was going to be the business guy, and I was going to be like the outside animal person, and then quickly realized that it's so intertwined. I mean, I think the most important thing that I tell anyone who's thinking about starting a farm is that you're starting a business, and then you are growing vegetables or you're raising animals as well, but it's not going to succeed unless the business succeeds. And so as much as you love getting dirty and being outside and spending time with your animals, it ends up being such a small percentage. It's obviously the fuel and what fuels me and gets me up every morning, but it's not what's going to sustain myself and my family. So I think there's a lot of young people that are just really excited about, bringing better food into the world, and not necessarily recognizing that you gotta make it work. You gotta pay yourself. You gotta do all these key things to make it succeed.
Yes, well, when we bought our ranch, it was supposed to be our retirement plan. And that hasn't quite worked out because 12 years later, my husband still has to commute to the city every day. And but we first thought we would do goats to clear out the brush. We bought this piece of property and it had been neglected for a long time. So we thought goats, and then we'll get sheep and cows. So, but we liked the goats so much, we never got the sheep, and we're still continuing with the goats. And then I had a contact in the grocery store business, and I called him up right after we bought the ranch, and I said, what products can't your customers get enough of? So he said, pasture-raised duck. So I said, great, okay, we can do this, knowing nothing about ducks at all. So I did all this online research, and then I asked him, well, what kind of ducks? And he said, well, Muscovy. Nobody does Muscovy. Well, I found out there's a reason for that. They're not the easiest kind of duck to raise because they're pretty mean to each other. And anyway, we did Muscovy for several years, and then we gradually brought on Pekin, and we were doing really well with that. And then the only place that will do custom USDA slaughter for duck. Custom slaughter means they will do it for small farmers as opposed to huge corporations like Petaluma Poultry that does their own. So it's very, very difficult to find USDA slaughter. So they took exception to our pin feathers. Even though we brought them exactly at the right time, they couldn't get the pin feathers out of our ducks. And it was slowing down the assembly lines for so long that they were losing money on our ducks. So we had to stop taking them there. And we basically had to stop. This was getting fairly lucrative business going. Chez Panisse was our main customer. And we had to stop it. And it was really one of, you say pivot, that was a pivotal point. So we're going, well, now what? And meanwhile, we had kept from these ducks a few back to lay eggs, and the eggs were selling. So we thought, okay, well, let's switch over to duck eggs. So we got the appropriate breeds, and we started doing duck eggs. Well, it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And then we got a distributor. Well, Whole Foods was our major customer. But then Whole Foods got bought out by Amazon. And Whole Foods, they go, yeah, it's great that you're doing organic, and it's great that you're doing pasture raised, but it's winter, where are our eggs? And ducks just aren't, when they're truly pastured, when you really care about how they're raised, they don't produce X number of eggs every single day of the week, of the month. It's very fluctuating. And so anyway, we got fired by our distributor, and then we were back to square one and having to build up things all over again. So what I'm trying to say by this long-winded saga is that farming's a moving target. You have to be flexible in your approach. You have to roll with the punches, because you get a lot of punches. And one thing you said too, I think is really critical about the bottom line. And I did a slide about calculating costs that I think is interesting.
Yeah, why don't we show that now while you're thinking about it?
Yeah. Okay, oop, there we go. Okay, so every year I do this. This is just a abbreviated version of the spreadsheet that I do, but I divide the cost of producing duck eggs into two categories: the cost of production and the cost of processing. And production includes the brooding, the feed, the bedding, the certifications, supplies, insurance. We had to get extra liability insurance because we were selling to retail markets. And then the 5% overhead that just is everything else you can't think of. And as it works out, when you're looking at just the production expenses, a huge, 92% is with the labor and the feed. So that is a huge percentage of costs right there. And even then, just the production expenses, when you divide it all out, it's costing you $4.82 just to produce that egg. That's not including the processing expense. With processing, I've included cartons, labels, the processing labor, that means the gathering of the eggs, the washing, the packing, the electricity to run the egg washing machine, and the supplies, for cleaning. And sponges, all that kind of stuff. Since we're organic certified, we're not allowed to use any products on the eggs. So then you look at the number of eggs produced, the number of dozen per year. So it's costing us in this sort of, that year, it costs us $7.19 to produce 1 dozen eggs. That's a lot of money. And then you're competing with some of these other producers that they don't have land costs, they don't have to do the insurance, they're not using organic feed, and because organic feed is twice the price per pound as non-organic. So you have to look at those costs, or otherwise you're going to be giving your product away. So do those calculations in the beginning and keep track of them every single year, even if it's depressing.
Can I ask one follow-up question on that? First of all, this is amazing. Like I would say, when you work with, I think this is the biggest challenge for small farmers to come up with these kind of spreadsheets. It's a challenging calculation, and the only thing I would suggest to producers, just from my own experience, is just the more you do these things, like everything in life, the better we all get at them, and the more refined our numbers get, because we start thinking about things like insurance and overhead and things like that. But I guess the question I would have, so obviously you said feed and labor are the two most expensive things. Because of where you're farming and the type of farming you do, how essential is that organic label to your marketing, to Chez Panisse, to those type of, to the Whole Foods of the world? Is that essential?
That is an excellent question, because we look at that with increasing interest.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that it is that important. Certainly we do have customers that is very important to. I don't know what the percentage is of the customers. So it was very important to Whole Foods when Whole Foods liked us. Mm-hmm. But now that they don't, I think that we have, can we set it back just one slide? Our ducks, and again, yeah, our ducks are, yeah, one back. Yeah, as you can see, they're totally outside, and we don't have movable coops. They're really outside. We're on the Sonoma coast. That seems to be really important to them. The fact that they're humanely raised, that they have a lot of freedom, that may be the important thing. And yet I know we do have customers that the organic certification is important.
Dee Dee, have you run into the same kind of
Yeah,
challenges?
I think I ran into the same thing. I mean, we were certified not, well, anyway, I'll try to keep it a little bit short. It's complicated.
It does.
But I think what I've learned from a lot of my customers who will come up to my stand at the farmer's market and they ask for organic is they don't always know what that means, especially when it comes to proteins. They don't, and so I tend to like engage with them rather than being like, no, try to educate them because I think just exactly what you're saying, what they want to hear is how they're treated and how they're raised if they're outside. They don't necessarily know that certified organic means this very small thing and doesn't actually currently touch on any of those. So I think it's a tricky thing because there's all these people who are like trying to do good and trying to buy good, and so they want to find certified organic, but aren't 100% educated in what that actually means. So yeah, it's a tricky thing, and I think it's an important thing to ask because I can see why it's selling at Whole Foods. People are looking only at that label, so it's like it probably depends on your market. For my operation, I'm selling to direct to consumer, so we can engage in that conversation. And so I find that they don't necessarily like organic is like something they come up with and say, is your meat organic? And I'm like, well, and there's all these reasons why it's not, it's not, they're raised organically and they're beyond, what I think is beyond organic, but
It's an educational kind of issue.
It's a huge educational issue, yeah.
So Leslie, do you want to kind of try to answer the original question, which is basically where, what types of challenges when you started farming, what are the things that you would try to impart on a beginning farmer, but also incorporate maybe a little about that organic and nutrition and feed issue into your answer, maybe what you were doing at the beginning and what you're doing now.
Yeah, when we started, it was not an intention to farm. It was, hey, the kids wanted some chickens. So we got 12 chicks in the mail and they were so excited. And then they were laying way too many eggs, for a family of 4. So I mentioned it to some families at preschool and they're just like, yeah, we'll buy them. I'm like, okay. So then we got to the point where they were buying all of the eggs and we were buying our eggs at the store. So we're like, we'll get more chickens. So then instead of 12, we got 25 more chickens. And then 6 months down the road, the exact same thing is happening again. So then we bought 50 chickens and 100 chickens. And, now we buy them 200 3 times a year. And we eat our own eggs now. We don't buy them at the store. So, it just kind of fell into our laps. And then people were like, oh, how about duck eggs? And we'd raised ducks before, just a few. And then we thought, well, let's just see what happens. So we'd gotten some ducks and we were breeding our own ducks for a while. And now we get ducks from Metzer every year or so. But yeah, things do change, especially with the ducks because the production does fluctuate all the time. There's a couple months of the year that they just turn off and you get nothing. And then, like right now is like our peak, like we're getting the most we're going to get from them for the year. And then customers don't always match up with that. So sometimes we'll have extras, sometimes we won't have enough, and that varies all the time. So it's just kind of keeping on your toes and trying not to get panicked when maybe you have a backlog of duck eggs or the orders are big and you can't fill those orders. And then I guess like a pivotal time for us was, not really related to the ducks, but when we started selling meat at the farmer's market instead of just eggs. And that really changed things for us a lot. But as far as the ducks go, we're kind of at a point right now where we're trying to decide if we want to expand or just kind of maintain the size of our flock.
And is that decision made on that you think that there's an untapped potential with respect to market, or is that?
Yeah, my concern is I don't want to have too many ducks and too many eggs because I do charge a significant amount of money for my duck eggs. They forage on, certified organic pasture. I do feed them conventionally, but we set them loose in the morning. They don't have any kind of fences or barriers or anything. They have a half-acre pond that they go to, and they can just do whatever they want all day. But then we run the risks of, you know, predators and things like that. And then, you know, we also need to make sure that we're supporting ourselves by doing this.
Right, of course.
So I just don't want to get too many and be stuck.
So that's kind of a good segue, I think, to the next topic, which are some of the management and husbandry kind of challenges you guys are facing. You know, you mentioned, you know, kind of predator issues. I know Joy mentioned there was a slide that she was that she had kind of scrolled through that had a kind of a predator control type of kind of theme to it. So again, you know, with this theme of beginning farmers and people that are out there that are maybe interested in waterfowl and raising them in these kind of pastured and kind of more open environments, you know, what are the one or two things from that management perspective that you'd want to impart to some of these beginning farmers out there with respect to raising waterfowl, which is a lot different, as you guys know better than most, than poultry, than chickens?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like, actually, if you scroll, yeah, that's actually a good one. Because this kind of shows a little bit of the setup that I do, because we do it all mobile and move them every other day, if not every day. There are a lot of challenges to that. One being labor, one's moving them every day or every other day, and moving the fence. But the way we have it set up is we have all of our poultry and pigs within their electric netting or electric fence, and then a perimeter electric fence around the whole pasture. And then we have 2 livestock guardian dogs within that. You can kind of see them in the background of this slide. So some challenges with them, I mean, so at this point we have the dogs and we rely on them. For the first few years, we would close all of the coops every night, which was crazy making, but necessary. And now I leave the coops open and let them come and go at night and leave the dogs in charge. And the ducks, because they're so easily spooked, that can be a problem. I mean, at night, I'll just walk out and I can hear them in the distance, like, something is walking by, like, it's, you know, something is happening out there and it's scaring them. And so it's almost like they were a little bit more calm when they were closed in their coop at night, but it's like it's a labor issue. And like, I know that they're safe, but I know that they're not calm, which they're not. You know, it's ducks, so they're not. It's a challenge in and of itself. So I'm finding that to be a little bit of an issue, especially when they we move them from the brooder out to the pasture. That usually that first week, because they're a little smaller too, they can get through some of them can pop through the fence a little easier. They just seem a little more skittish and a little harder to contain in the beginning. Also, another sort of husbandry issue we've had is on the parts of pasture, especially like in the fall as things dry out quite a bit, we don't irrigate anything. We have some pasture that is not just like lush grass, it's like some hemlock or some wheat. Like, it's like thicker things, especially that dry out towards the fall. And I find that the ducks have much harder time navigating those things as opposed to like the chickens and turkeys who are like no problem at all. So we've gotten to start, like, in those particular pieces of pasture, we'll mow it a little bit more for the ducks in particular, just because they can get hung up on it a little more. They're just like not as agile. And so it's kind of just interesting. I mean, everything kind of unfolds differently every year, as we all know. But and we have I can't say this one, but we do have 2 kiddie pools that we have with them, and then we change them out twice a day. And so everything, you know, it's a lot of work, but it's the system that is so far working for us. But you know, I mean, that's a key piece to anybody. It's like, where are you and what is your environment? And it's like, what I do is gonna be so different than what you do, so different than what you do, but like overall it's like fairly similar. But like, you're gonna have your own restraints and things that work and things that don't work. I mean, somebody would be like, it's insane that you move the coop every other day, you know, and I don't disagree. So far, it's like, it's working because it's the way we have it set up. We got it cut down to a minimal amount of time.
So on that complexity that you're kind of talking about and all the work that you have to do, so I'm amazed that you're able to raise, all these different species on the same space of land. So can you speak to that a little? Because that seems really complex, and I think you didn't even mention that. So to me, that for you, it's just a totally normal day. But I think for a lot of people out here, that sounds really overwhelming and challenging. So can you talk about that progression, like where it started, maybe with one species and how it expanded, or did you just go all in?
It is overwhelming, though, don't get me wrong. Yeah, I mean, we started, I think the first year we did just heritage meat chickens and pigs and turkeys. And so it was the 3, but they were all, fairly manageable. And so then we've kind of diversified by doing different breeds of meat chickens and then brought on the ducks. So it feels like a lot. It's a lot of organizing in the freezer as well. But we have the systems are all set up to be quite similar. They all have the same kind of housing, they all have the same kind of fencing, they all have the same feeders and waters. They grow at different rates. So that's, like processing schedules are challenging. But I have basically my land is like, I lease land from a land trust. So I don't own it, but it's 62 acres and it's just long and flat and narrow. So it actually is incredibly conducive to what I'm doing. It's not hilly at all. There's no tree. I mean, all these trees are like on the side, but not on the actual piece of land that I have. So it's like just this long valley. And so we, through a NRCS grant last year, installed a livestock water pipeline down the entire field. So what we were rotating all of these animals for about 5 years on like 9 acres. Now we have basically the whole run of the land. So I'm giving that 9 acres a break this year and starting everybody kind of at the end of that and going to go down. So yeah, it's a lot, but I've kind of like every year trying to get it more and more simple. I want to keep working harder. And so I think by creating systems where they all eat the same feed. We get like one custom mix it is organic, but it's like everyone's eating it from start to finish, and we supplement as we need. And then as far as our housing and like all those needs go, they're all the same.
Great.
Yeah.
With the ducks, I think the major issues have been predation, and our worst predator is ravens. Yeah. They will eviscerate an adult duck, and they're just horrible animals. I hate them. Bobcats are another one, but the livestock guardian dogs are really helpful with that. Although it's difficult sometimes. We have 7 Anatolian shepherds, and it's difficult sometimes to find ones that are totally reliable with poultry, because poultry are awfully enticing. So I think your idea of the moat is a good one. But the predation issues are rather alarming because we're quite isolated and we have everything out there.
So what would be, from a predation perspective, what is a normal level of, like, as a percentage? What do you expect, or what's the range, or what's a best case or worst case scenario, however you kind of try to define it?
I'm embarrassed to tell you. We just did a duck count, and it started out at 200, and what is it? We're 10 months down the line, and we're at 50 short, which is terrible.
And that's pretty normal at some level?
At some level, yeah. And it's ravens. And we haven't figured out. We've tried overhead netting, we've tried things waving, we've tried those red lights, we've tried everything, and it's just nothing seems to stop them, except one thing, which I won't mention.
One question I have, so we've talked about the guard dogs before in the past, and people have asked, what experience do you guys have with training those dogs? Are there services that will train them and then you purchase them? How does that happen? Because we've had people ask that question on Zoom before. We haven't had time to try to answer that in this workshop series. Do you guys have any experience with that?
I breed our own.
You breed your own.
I also show them. So all of our livestock guardian dogs are AKC champions and grand champions. But I raise them because I can't find the temperament and the health profile that I want, so I have to produce it. And I take the puppies from the time their eyes are open. They're raised with ducks and they're raised with goats. And in using livestock guardian dogs, it's tricky because you can't just take any Pyrenees or any Anatolian and expect it to work. It's a combination of genetics, shaping, and luck. And they're also a dog that you couldn't just go get a dog out of the pound and expect it to be a good livestock guardian dog. These dogs are purposely bred to have the chase instinct bred out of them. But then it's not so much training as shaping and monitoring for the first couple of years.
So can you define shaping for those of us that don't know what that
from the
means?
time the puppy is like walking around, I will take it out on a long line when I put the ducks away because we herd the ducks in at night. So I'll have it on a long line. We go in the duck enclosure and I just take it around with me. So it gets used to seeing moving ducks, smelling the ducks, more seeing them move. And then eventually you when you're putting the ducks away, you try what happens if you let it off the leash. And if it starts interacting too enthusiastically, then by then it knows what no is.
Mm-hmm.
And so you shape, you correct it. And just monitoring, watching how the dog's behavior is, if it's being suitably submissive to the stock, if it's looking peaceful, like that one, and just, watching.
Interesting.
It's a process, and they don't all succeed.
So Leslie, kind of on that same.
Sorry, I'm Joy.
Oh, sorry, Joy. Sorry.
Sorry.
on that same note of, what are the kind of husbandry and management challenges that you've kind of faced? What are the
Just
big
keeping
ones
them
that come to mind?
safe is important, and we just kind of watch them. We don't have any guardian dogs, but last year we had an experience where all of a sudden the ducks didn't want to leave the barn. They would refuse to go to the pond. The pond is probably 500 or 600 feet away from the barn. And they would just refuse to go. So there was a couple-month period where they just stayed in the barn all the time. The door was open, they could go do whatever they wanted, and they were just like, nope, we're not going. And then we'd seen a coyote kind of snooping around the pond, and we're just like, oh. And then we did a duck
Smart
count,
ducks.
and we're just like, oh. So he'd been snacking. But we took care of that problem, and now the ducks are all back up at the pond again, and we're just watching to see what will happen. We do have a Australian Shepherd mix that, we have one, and then there's another one that lives closer to where the ducks like to hang out during the day, and they're kind of aware of what's going on, so they would probably alert us if something is out there. So we're just kind of watching the ducks' behavior and see what they think is happening. Right now they feel pretty safe because they're really adventuring a little bit farther every day. So we feel confident that they're okay.
And can you also speak from a management and husbandry perspective, the challenges of having all these different species on your farm, and what recommendations you might have to beginning farmers on how to move in that direction?
Right now, all of our animals are kind of living in little nooks and crannies of a property that's actually being leased by another farmer. He gets all of it, but I know there's certain parts that he doesn't use. So I'm like, hey, I see you're not using this area here. Can I use that? Sure. So then we're like, okay, how can we make this work? So we have pigs in 3 different places. The cows are actually on a neighbor's property. We don't even have those at the main property. And then the ducks, they just have a trailer that's just parked under the barn, and then, like I said, we would open the door and they just go wherever they want. So they don't have any kind of fences. The other tenants that live there get a little annoyed when they want to drive out the driveway and there's a whole pile of ducks that just whatever, they got to get out of the way. all of our chickens have their own pastured area because, you know, chickens destroy the ground. And, you know, if the other guy has cows, we can't have the chickens destroying his grass because they would just take it all. So those guys all have their own pastures that they're in all the time. We're not able to rotate yet, but we're trying to find more area that we can expand to kind of rotate them. But as far as the ducks go, they have no restrictions.
Can I add something about multi-species farming? I think it's a good thing for a small farm to do that, because as we've mentioned before, there's this balancing act about when the ducks are producing or when somebody's producing or when something's ready to harvest. And if you have a couple different things going on, you can kind of fill in the economic gaps. When the ducks aren't laying, you can slaughter some goats, or you know, do it that way. It helps kind of even things out a bit.
So you just read my mind, because my next question was going to be, if I'm a beginning farmer and I'm watching this on Zoom or in person, the question that I'm going to have is, okay, tell me which species makes the most money, and that's the one I'm going to have on my farm. So as a novice beginning farmer, tell me why that, from your opinion, why would that be the incorrect way to think? So.
I would think it would be not so good, especially if you're a beginning farmer, because there's disasters that happen in the beginning. I mean, these disasters that you just can't even contemplate and don't even want to think about. They're so awful. And you have economic catastrophes. You have, like when we lost our ability to process the meat ducts. So if you have a couple different things going on, you have some fallback, you have some flexibility.
And what's the disadvantage if you're a beginning farmer? I mean, is it just the complexity of it? Is it the additional equipment? Is it the training? Is there a disadvantage, or you think that having that redundancy is a good thing?
I think part of farming is learning and being challenged. And so if you've got that mind frame, which is something I think every good farmer does have, then the challenges of taking on something new can be really exciting.
Dee Dee, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. And yeah, I think when I started, everything was new. I mean, my business partnership was new, the land was new, the farm was new, everything was new. So we were starting this business, not knowing if any of it was going to still be there at the end of the year. So we actually chose animals to start with, knowing that our particular land, the soil quality and the water were really limiting factors. So we decided to start with animals that we would rotate and hopefully build up the soil and keep water usage low. But also we started with breeds that are animal species, and then breeds that if it didn't work out, we could process them and then move on. And they would actually, by the end of the year, all of them would be processed. And so we kind of just went into it like, well, if it doesn't work out, it's okay. But if it does, great, then we do it again, and we like maybe expand as we grow. And I think also, I think it's really important to not just choose something that makes money, but something that you also have to enjoy. I mean, we spend a lot of time with these creatures. And so if you hate collecting eggs, like you're gonna hate it in 365 days of the year, you know? So it's like, to some degree, you have to enjoy these animals that you're working with. You really can't just pick the best moneymaker, or maybe pick the moneymaker and then like balance it out a little bit. But if you choose pigs because they have like the best turnaround, but like again, you don't like pigs, or like you hate pork chops. I don't know. It's just like you got to find the balance because it's your life. It's like it's all day, every day.
Is there a disadvantage in your mind, or do you see it as
to what?
To having these complex multi-species farms? And would you recommend it for a beginning person?
I would, but not. I wouldn't necessarily dive in and get like 5, 6, 7 different species of animals. I would say I think diversity is good because, I don't know, say for example you get a disease in something and that particular species doesn't live, or you have to euthanize it or whatever, like worst case scenario. then you have, I mean, it's just like diversifying with vegetables. It's like, why it'd be great to have a diversified farm, and a monocrop is like, if all your tomatoes don't like get blight and they don't have any tomatoes, and like you don't have anything. So if you have at least some diversity, you can rely on something else as far as your income goes. But I think also taking it slow is really important. Don't like try to do everything the first year or even the first 2 or 3 years, because like you are already going to be 100% exhausted and like crazy anyway. So I think try to minimize that as much as possible by not like trying to do everything from the very beginning.
Joy,
I do feel like multi-species is important because there is that ebb and flow of income for all the different species, and you want to make sure that you always have money coming in from somewhere to keep you going. But it is also, like for us, it's like running 4 separate businesses all in one spot.
Interesting.
Some things can overlap, but really each of our species live completely separately from the others, and we care for them all in different ways. So it is a lot like having 4 completely separate businesses.
So some of the pictures that you guys have posted here, I wanted to kind of pivot a little to some of the marketing and economics, and the pictures are literally like, I feel like I'm in the middle of like a Norman Rockwell kind of painting that is just beautiful, and you've got all these different animals, and it's just amazing. We don't have very many farms like that anymore. And I'm wondering, when you think about kind of just the marketing challenges that you have, is one thing I'd like to kind of ask is, does the multi-species aspect, do you think, give you an advantage over other pastured and free-range animals? And that kind of, where you can show those pictures of all these different animals moving around and being produced on your land. And then if you can also kind of try to comment on, what are, when you think, is on the marketing side, is there still an educational kind of component to waterfowl? And what are the educational challenges in marketing? Like, are people still kind of afraid of duck eggs? And how do you try to, do you see that as a huge challenge? And how do you try to educate people on farmers markets and retail and restaurants? So why don't we start with Joy this time?
Yeah, as far as getting people to try them, I always let them know that duck eggs are the preferred egg for baking. So if you don't like it pan fried, just save it for when you're making something. And they last forever in the refrigerator. So, if you're not baking something for even a month and a half, your eggs are still going to be good. They're still fine. Yeah, I feel that marketing the duck eggs is completely separate from anything else I do. Most of what we sell is at the farmer's market, and we sell all of it there. But the duck eggs, I don't sell a lot of duck eggs at the farmer's market. I do sell some, but most of them go to other places, more like online farmers markets where people know that that's what they want. But yeah, marketing the duck eggs is totally separate, and finding places to carry them is a little bit harder just because they're also not sure, and they're not going to sell a lot of them. So it gets a little hard when you're making deliveries of small amounts to multiple places, and then it's like, do you really want to do that? So,
do you see a trend in any direction? Or?
Yeah, the interest is definitely increasing, which is nice. But then you still get those people at the farmer's market that walk by and go, no. But it's like my husband never wanted to try them. He thought that was disgusting. And then I just started preparing them in different ways and not telling him what they were. And then he's like, oh, I do like those. So now it's pretty much the only egg in our house.
That's interesting.
We have signs. Education is critical to any endeavor, I think. But at the farmer's market, we have the little sign about the nutritional comparison of duck eggs with chicken eggs, twice the iron, 5 times the B12, that whole thing. And then we also have encouraged people to come and buy from our farm store. So we have displays in that, and we have farm tours. So that all helps.
And do you see a general trend of more interest in these kind of products, or what's your sense of that?
There's a lot of factors involved in the market, like the distribution channels, and for us, it was the whole Whole Foods thing. But I think there's definitely more interest, and we're fortunate. We are really, really fortunate to live near a major population center of people that are educated, have money to spend, and care about what they're eating and where their food comes from. So if we were trying to do some of these things up in the middle of Trinity County, I think it would be really difficult. So we're very fortunate.
So know your market.
Know your market, yeah.
Bay Area bubble is, it's really important for what we're doing. What's your question again?
Oh, so on the marketing side,
Yeah.
you know, what are the opportunities that you're seeing? What are do you see like a general trend and interest in these? And can you speak to kind of the education of you know, people that are at restaurants, or just the challenges you have with getting people to try new foods like duck eggs?
Yeah, I think, let's see, so I do the ducks for meat, and our progress has gone from like doing heritage ducks to pekin, and the heritage ducks, as much as I love them, they just were not what people wanted. They want like a big duck, you know, they want big breast meat. They want, I feel like committed to sticking with the chicken thing, but with ducks I was, we adjusted a little bit to kind of give the customer what they wanted. And I do see an increase in curiosity. I mean, for duck meat, people are very intimidated. I find a lot of customers are like, I love eating duck, I've never made one, I'm totally intimidated by it. And so there is a ton of education. It's just like, don't be scared, they're so delicious, and it's not that different than roasting a chicken. And so there's tons of conversations about that, and like recipe cards and things like that. I find that one other challenge I have is the fresh versus frozen, which is the age-old question. For the most part, I do all frozen, just because, and that in and of itself requires education, because people don't understand that if it's fresh, it's just killed. And so in order to do that every week, you're killing something every week. So there's a lot of education around that as well, which we are not at the scale to be doing that, nor maybe at some point, but it's just processing is its whole other battle, and processors in addition. So at least for me, I'm sure for you guys too, everything is at least 2 hours away. And
3.
yeah, if not more, exactly. And so and for ducks, there's one, at least as far as I've found, there's one. And so, you know, doing the dance to work with them, but also yeah, just educating people. And I know, you know, chefs and retail, they all want fresh, and they want it every week. And for ducks, I'm just not at that scale, and I don't know if I want to be.
One of our restaurants, a major restaurant, did a blind taste testing with their chefs, and they took our ducks that had been frozen and ones that were fresh, and they had their 10 chefs see which ones they preferred. They could not tell the difference.
Yeah, I believe it.
Interesting.
I believe it.
I think it has more to do with the quality of the meat and how it's prepared, as opposed to whether it's frozen or not.
Yeah, and so that, I mean, I've adjusted a little bit with my chickens. I'm doing them a lot more regular. So like I think we'll do every 3 weeks this year. I'll offer fresh at the market and then frozen. And so I'm catering to it a little bit, but also, you know, educating people at the same time is like, okay, you can get it fresh now, but then you have to buy it frozen too. So, yeah. No, not it.
So
Certainly not ducks.
So we talked a little about kind of educating, you know, chefs, and educating, you know, other people that are purchasing duck eggs and duck meat. I'd like to talk a little about how you guys are educating yourselves. As you said, Dee Dee, this is, you know, kind of a lifelong kind of learning process. So what sources of information do you use? What internet sites? What other types of information do you get in kind of a traditional or non-traditional sense? And then, since we're at the School of Veterinary Medicine at UC Davis, like to also kind of ask, are there, you know, is there a niche for, and do you ever need the services of veterinarians? And can you find that where you guys are? Is that a hard challenge? So why don't we start with
Leslie? With the poultry, with the ducks, it seems like the ducks are either great or when it's dead. There's not a lot of in between. And having a flock mentality when you're managing livestock, I think, is important. You can't take every little thing and take it to a vet because you would be broke. But one year we had, the geese started dying. And first it was one, and we thought, and then it was another, and I watched it happen. I mean, it was like fine, and then it went down and go, and that was it. And so by the third goose, I bundled them up and I shipped them, or no, I brought them up to UC Davis because they have that diagnostic laboratory here.
Lab,
Yeah, it was great because I found out, unfortunately, it was avian cholera and that there was a remedy for it. So I went right home, treated all the rest of the flock, and everybody was fine after that. So I found that absolutely invaluable to have that resource there.
So most states do have a similar diagnostic lab system that California has, and these are pathologists and microbiologists and virologists, and for a nominal fee, in some states it's actually free, but for a nominal fee they'll do a necropsy with the goal of trying to protect the rest of the flock. So that as a veterinarian, that flock mentality and approach is essential instead of treating the individual animal. Joy?
Yeah, I feel the same way, that if there was a problem that was really taking over the flock, then I would find an issue, but we haven't had a problem like that. We recently had something with some pigs. They were all kind of coughing and whatever, but we definitely have a vet that can help us with that. But yeah, we don't have a veterinarian for, chickens and ducks. But, Dr. Google helps with everything. I mean, anything that I want to learn, I can talk to other farmers. Otherwise, I get on the internet and I just research every single thing I can find and then decide which way I want to go.
And are there specific kind of websites or people that you
a lot
kind
of
reach out
message
to?
boards tend to have some good information, kind of people asking a similar question and then kind of looking at what the answers are and then kind of leading me to other sites. But I don't have any specific sites that I go to. I just kind of look at the whole thing and just browse.
Yeah, I think as far as information gathering, I mean, things like this are great. Like, I was excited to meet you guys, and I feel like I try to be as open as possible. I mean, like, I feel like I know nothing. I mean, like, even, like every year I'm like, wow, I don't know anything.
Yeah.
And so I actually appreciate that I have that attitude, because there's so much more to learn. And I think that I feel like I get a lot of information from other farmers and ranchers that are doing similar, or even not, like, even just, I find people that are working with animals to be just helpful in talking through things, marketing animal, like, you lose an animal and it is really upsetting or whatever, So I think that farmer to farmer, if you can find people in your area, or even not, like even in your state, I think that can be really helpful. I know that APA is a really great resource for a lot of people too, and I find their message board, I don't know if you guys ever do that, but American Pasture Poultry Association.
American Pasture Poultry Producers Association.
Yeah,
There's an extra P in there somewhere.
But yeah, they're super helpful, and they have like a newsletter, but they also, basically, if you sign up, people just post questions and then people answer them, and it can cover anything around poultry. So it can be really helpful, just to because it's pretty instant too. I mean, people will respond within an hour, sometimes definitely within the day. So I find that really helpful. Yeah, and as far as vet care, I have also brought pigs to here for the necropsy, and that's been super helpful. It's quite a drive, so it has to be. It would definitely have to be affecting a flock if I brought a bird up here, but I have shipped.
You can't ship,
Yeah,
share my mind.
I've done that too. Because similarly, yeah, with the ducks, I feel like it's like they're fine, and then one's not, and then or like I said, we'll sometimes have leg issues too, and I think sometimes that has to do with like the unevenness of our pasture sometimes, or the getting spooked, and just trying to run faster than they should be running. This is my own guess anyway, but those issues tend to be problems for at least particularly with the ducks. And I'll try to separate them. We don't have a local poultry vet. But it's always that question of economics too when it comes to.
And I think Metzer has a good, their website has a lot of really helpful information, because there's not a lot of I feel like they're more science driven in a way than some of the sites out there, and they have a lot of very good information specific to waterfowl. There's not a lot of places.
Absolutely. They've to their credit, they've taken a real interest in kind of the educational and biosecurity and disease kind of challenges, and making that information, available. Is their website's a real go, at least from my perspective, has been a real go-to site. Because I will admit I am not extremely knowledgeable when it comes to waterfowl, so that's a great source of good information. So one question, not to put you guys on the spot, but I'm curious, with the experience that you guys have, when you go to an event like this, what do you guys learn? Did you pick up like a kernel of information from one of the speakers that you're going to take home and remember and utilize in one way? So you seem, Leslie, like you've got something.
Yeah, I was writing things down, because one of the problems as a farmer is you're always so busy and you're always juggling 20 million different priorities, and you forget stuff, or you don't have time to read or to research properly. And then Mark said several things that I go, oh yeah, about feeding, the nutrition and the watering. And I forgot about that, and so I need to implement it. So it's really good. It's very helpful.
Yeah, finding ways that already work for you are one thing, but then finding a way to improve on those is always something that we're looking for. So like the water, like I'm happy with our watering system, but it's a mess. And I'm just like, oh, let's look into the nipple waterers and see if that can work with the size barn we have and the amount of birds we put in it, but see if that can help reduce the mess, and maybe we don't have to clean the barn as often.
Interesting.
Yeah, I was bummed to miss Mark's. Luckily it's recorded, right? But yeah, I mean, I just feel I get inspired. But even walking in and just listening to, I mean, key parts, like similar to what you're saying, like just subtle things. It's like, oh yeah, this thing's working for me, but that could be so much better if I did it. If I just like tweak this one thing, or like change this bedding, or I'm currently thinking about brooding ducks outside and like have more mobile brooders, so we can kind of get on. It's like a little bit less cleaning inside, and they like grow. They grow at a rate that like they're not really ready to go outside full time, because they're not feathered out in a way yet, but they're too big to be inside. So luckily we have this space in the barn that has a door to go outside, but I'm like rethinking, like maybe if we just did it outside and like made there an indoor space for the outdoor space too. So anyway, I'm just always like trying to tweak those things, and it's really nice to hear other people's perspective and inspiration. So yeah, I find this really helpful. So thank you.
So before we move on to some of the questions from the audience, first of all, if you're on Zoom or you're here, please start thinking about what questions you may or may not have. I want to leave plenty of time for that. But one of the things I wanted to start wrapping up on was what type of regulatory challenges do you guys have? This is a, I know sometimes I don't want this to become a complaining session, because I know we could be here for a few hours if we do that. But I guess, we're in California, and for better or for worse, there's a lot of different rules, including, water and soil. And I know there's a lot of welfare, state and federal laws that are starting to become implemented. And I'm wondering if you can kind of speak to some of the challenges you have with that. I know the farms that you have are obviously not always what the regulations are intended for. So the smaller farms are kind of a square peg in a round hole a lot of the time. And trying to implement the FDA's egg safety law on some of these farms can be really challenging, for example, and so on and so forth. And that might not be the best example, but I'm wondering if you can kind of speak to how you educate yourself on those regulations, because understanding those is really challenging. And what are the ones that are, you think are maybe not as well intended as maybe were meant to be? So I don't know, Dee Dee, do you want to start, or?
I'm gonna hand this one off.
Okay.
Yeah, just went through a little more.
My bugaboo is the slaughter regulations. In order to legally sell, and this is more pertaining to the goats, but to legally sell the goat to a restaurant, it has to be USDA slaughtered. Well, it gets really complicated because I have to take it up to Dixon, and then you have to have a USDA slaughter butcher, and then it gets sent down back here. But if someone buys the whole goat, it can get on-farm slaughter, and I can use the local butcher and not have to go 2 hours to Dixon, even though it's the same animal. So it makes, some of these things make no sense to me whatsoever.
So have you worked with your, state assembly and assemblymen or assemblywoman or state senators, or do you have any kind of recourse in your mind, or are these things that you just have to deal with at this point?
I think it gets back to farmers are so busy farming, it's very difficult to think above that level. I've done lobbying in Sacramento on other issues in the past, but that was before I had a farm.
Joy?
Yeah, definitely the larger animal processing for meat is complicated. And then like our local slaughterhouse just got a new office manager, and they don't know what they're doing, and it's a mess. So trying to work around that has been a real crazy thing. But one thing about like poultry production is a lot of the state and federal rules don't apply to you if you have less than 3,000 birds. You're considered compliant automatically if you have less than 3,000.
That being said, I know the state is looking into lowering that threshold.
Yeah, but they'd have to lower it quite a bit to, I mean, between chickens and ducks, I maybe have 1,000 birds.
Okay.
So one problem that I'm running into is I have a customer who wants to work with me, but they want me to have some food safety certificates on hand. I cannot find anyone who can give me a protocol for duck egg food safety. So I have to work with this organization. I got to call them this week, and we're going to work together to create something, because this person doesn't know. So she's going to have me help her create a duck egg food safety protocol.
Interesting.
So it's like, I want to work with this customer, but
yeah,
they won't take me yet because I can't.
So the state does have some shell egg food safety you can use as a template.
Yeah, I called the state, and they were like, yeah, you're automatically compliant because your flock size. Right. You don't need anything. I'm like, but I need something, because they won't buy from me without this. And they're just like, you're fine. I'm like, no.
I've seen that same scenario play out where the farmer tells the Whole Foods or the co-ops of the world that we're below 3,000, and the store, the co-op, basically tells the farmer, our insurer is demanding that you follow the shell egg food safety rule, this FDA egg safety rule, in order for us to be able to sell your product. So there are some farms that are below 3,000 that are trying to comply with some of these rules, even though they're not supposed to.
But don't, by virtue of having the CDFA handler's license, that certifies that you're following those rules.
That's on the meat side,
no,
correct?
it's the eggs.
On the egg side?
Because if you're selling eggs in California, you have to have an egg.
Oh, right. Yes,
license.
you're right. Absolutely right. Yes.
And that's not enough for her.
Oh, no. No, that doesn't mean anything. No, and then when I called, they're just like, no, you're fine. That's not working.
Yeah, because my understanding is that handler's license comes with, well, I don't think you've actually, I'd have to look into it to see if actually if that includes
you send in a
the
check
drag
and they give
swabs
you a
and that
number.
includes vaccination or not.
If your flock is larger.
Yeah.
But for a smaller flock, but I sent
But you
in a
still have to
check
get the
and
egg handler's license regardless of your size. So actually they're right to that point. And one thing I've always encouraged farmers, and just being, kind of with full disclosure, is that if you are going to be around 3,000 hens and you want to get bigger, or you're 2,000 hens and you want to get bigger, I would say if you're going to go from 2,000 to maybe 3,000 or 4,000, it's not worth it, because those rules, the way they're written, aren't really written for small farms. If you're going to go from 2,000 to 10,000 or 20,000 or 30,000, then that jump makes sense. But I always joke with farmers that you should have 2,999 and just stay below that, because especially for these alternative farms, the rules just aren't written for them. And while the spirit of the rule, I think, is well-intentioned from a food safety perspective, for some of these smaller farms, it is really hard to comply and probably not useful from a food safety perspective. So if you're going to make that jump, make it a huge jump. If not, stay right under the threshold from my perspective, at least. Dee, do you have anything to add on regulations?
I think, again, I don't do eggs, so I don't have the joys of what challenges you guys have. But with doing meat, when we processed on farm the first year, and then for many reasons decided to do off farm slaughter, and that comes with its own challenges, of course, but it almost for me it if we're going to USDA slaughter for the birds or CDFA, it increases markets and where it can sell, but also it made me feel safer too, and also it's just, I just felt like that was a good decision for our business. But it's really hard. It's really challenging. It's a lot of driving. It's a lot of figuring out cold storage and all of the regulations around keeping things cold for like transport and selling, and following all those guidelines for, again, with fresh and then with frozen, and working with different processors that won't freeze or won't do different things, but they hold the monopoly. So you are just like, I literally have to do whatever you say if I want to keep doing this thing. So I don't know that necessarily is touching on your question, but definitely some challenges for sure.
So before we kind of ask the last question, where I want you guys to kind of talk about kind of what the future holds, and when you think about the future, I was talking to someone that was telling me that a lot of, just anecdotally, that a lot of these smaller farms are from her perspective, are starting to get smaller even, and even some of them are closing, and I'd like you to kind of comment on that future. But before we get to that, and how you guys think you guys are hopefully going to grow or maintain your business, I'd like to kind of answer questions from the audience, and I'm leaving a good chunk of time here. We actually have about a good 20 minutes left. So if there are folks that have questions or comments, make sure you write them in Zoom, and we can start with the people in the room first, and then we can, are there some questions on Zoom that are lined up? Okay, how many do we have, just so we?
4 or 5.
Okay. So why don't we start with the room and try to speak up. Should I repeat the question?
Yeah, that'd always be good.
Okay. So is there any questions in the room from anybody? Any of the panelists?
The people that are buying the duck at the farmer's market, is it people taking it home, or are they chefs that are buying at the farmer's market?
For the most part, people taking it home.
So can you repeat the question? Actually?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. He asked if folks that are buying ducks at the farmer's market are mostly chefs or mostly individuals, and they, for me, are mostly individuals. If chefs are buying, they have like pre-ordered and they're just picking it up. So it's very rare that someone's going to show up and buy, more than 2
Do you
at a time.
cut up, or is it always whole?
Well, the processor will not cut up
Okay.
yet. So hopefully that may change this year, but they will only do whole ducks, and so therefore I only sell whole ducks right now.
Can you define that for folks like myself? What do you mean exactly by cut up and whole?
Yeah, so some processors, if I bring my chickens, I can get them cut up into breasts and legs and get the bones and the heads and necks and feet and all those things and sell all those things, or I can sell a whole chicken. So similarly, a customer might come up and say, can I just get duck breasts? And I'm saying, sorry, no, you can't. You have to buy the whole duck, because the processor doesn't offer that service yet.
Okay.
So I guess another option is I could get the whole duck back, not wrapped, take it to another butcher or commercial kitchen and break it down.
Okay.
Which I know people who do that. I'm not choosing to do that right now.
What about cutting it in like halves? Is
In
that?
half. They won't do that yet either. No further processing beyond packaging it like in the cryo back.
So no spatchcocking yet of ducks?
Yeah, nothing yet. Yeah.
Any other questions from anyone in the room? Todd, do you want to read off some of the online
I
questions?
can do that. One thing I wanted to remind everybody about is that Mark Bland is going to be doing an egg quality assurance workshop here on the 29th. 27th?
Yeah.
27th of March. I do believe he does alternative species. Is that right, Maurice?
Yeah, so Dr. Mark Bland is a poultry veterinarian based in Sonoma. He does, among other things, he works with commercial, conventional commercial, but also alternative, not alternative farms, but also waterfowl and other species. He's kind of a unique veterinarian. So normally you have to be, most veterinarians stay in their state, but poultry is kind of a different kind of beast in its own right. And he does work and consulting all the way along the West Coast and some of the, I think Idaho and also into British Columbia. So he's worked with a lot of small farms and has that kind of level of expertise also with respect to waterfowl.
I do have one more question. Do you hear much from your customers about GMO free? At the APA conference, I heard a lot of people talking about GMO free versus organic, and I guess is that trending, or what's your experience with that?
We hear a lot of that, people wanting non-GMO.
I am getting two now. Is it soy free, corn free, and GMO. Ours is organic and non-GMO, so it's an easy question. But I'm getting more and more people asking for the soy free.
And are your feed mills able to create a ration that is soy free?
I think they could. I mean, I know that it's challenging to supplement the protein levels that will allow the animals to grow at the rate that is economically viable. So, because then you have to use different sources. It's done, and I know some farms do only, do soy-free feed, but I'm not currently. So far, it's not affecting. The demand is minimal.
Any other comments?
I mean, there's definitely people that ask for it, but it's my understanding that there is a chemical in soy that allows the production of the eggs. And when you remove that from the feed, you definitely have to replace it with lots of other things.
There was an
to
article
create that.
in Apagrit several years ago. There was a study that somebody did about comparing growth rates and soy versus non-soy foods, which is very interesting. You could get it from Apagrit.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in general, like soy, what soy brings to the equation as far as nutrition is protein, and what corn brings to the equation is energy. And you need a balance of those two. So younger birds need more protein so they can grow big, and layer birds need typically a little more energy so they have the energy to lay eggs. And if you take out the soy, you're absolutely right. Then you have to replace it with some other protein source. And other parts of the world have other grains that and other protein sources they can use. But it is that's where nutritionists and feed mills have to get pretty creative if people want the soy removed. So it's a challenge.
For those that have different breeds of birds, do you guys intermix? Do you keep separate? What do you tend to do if you have the same breeds of, say, waterfowl?
We have the golden hybrid 300s and the white layers, and we purposely alternate the purchase of those so we can tell them apart because they do all live together.
We have different flocks, so it's more cohort, and we do alternate colors with the same two. But we're finding that the golden layers are a little flightier, and I don't know if you found that, than the white ones. But if they're color coded, you can tell if someone jumped the fence and needs to go back.
Is that why you're color coding them? Is that, can you explain to people the value of mixing, of shifting, raising one color and then switching to another one, as far as trying to remove birds as they get older? Or?
Well, it's because you keep the birds, we keep them probably later than we should, so 2.5, 3 years old. And then after that, their production rate falls so that it's not economically viable, and probably before that, but it takes so long to get them to start laying, 5 months, that you feel you want to give them a little more time. And you want to keep them in cohorts so that those that have the same birth date are the same ones that you depopulate at the end of their time, and that you're not accidentally getting rid of the younger birds.
Yeah, it's a clever system. I was talking to one farmer who said it took him about 30 years to realize that was a good way of trying to figure out how to do that. And it's so simple, and it's such a it's such a unique and clever way of figuring that issue out. As far as removing the birds that are not productive instead of having to leg ban them and inevitably lose those leg bans.
The first flock we were banding everybody, and then we were cutting wings, but nobody ever flies out, so we stopped cutting wings.
That was actually another question, was about flightiness. You guys don't have problems with that? You don't need to clip wings?
No.
No. We do for our turkeys, but not for our ducks.
Yeah, we do for our chickens. And then we do have 7 or 8 Muscovy ducks that really just hang out. Because they fly and they just do whatever. We don't expect anything from them. They just chill. So we don't do anything with them.
And I think on the flightiness side, we have some behaviors that know a lot more about this than I do. So maybe Maja can comment on this. But I've always heard that, if you have enough enrichment, then those birds are going to be probably less flighty, aside from some of the genetics that's kind of baked into the cake per se. But if you can, these birds are raised in such a there's so many different enrichments for them that it doesn't probably motivate them as much to be flighty. I don't know, Maja, do you have any comment on that at all?
Well, we chatted about it a little bit earlier.
Okay.
There's no research-based evidence for that, but
Okay.
I think
Anecdotal.
that anecdotally, and if that's what people are experiencing, then
Okay. You've heard that similar kind of thought, or
I
that?
have not heard that.
Okay,
But
interesting.
it doesn't mean that it hasn't worked for some. But
Okay.
How are all of you packaging your duck eggs for sale? What are you doing specifically?
We have 3 sizes of eggs that we sort them into. When they're first starting to lay, they're fairly small, and then as the birds get older, they will be bigger eggs. So when we have a big automatic washing machine, the Sani wash. It was big, yeah. So it's like a car wash for eggs, and then at the other end, you pull them out, and you get to where you can just feel them, and you know what size they are. So we package them in 12 packs, and we have 6 packs that are big, jumbo, and then and this gets back to finding the right cartons that will fit them. We get our cartons from eggcartons.com. And except for the flat tops, which our feed store has a better price on. Flat top dozen cartons. So, and then we have our own label.
We package in dozens, half dozens, and then we also sell as flats, like in a case. Just the regular extra larges and the jumbos will fit in the cartons that we have. And then sometimes when I get the really big ones, I can get them, if I angle them correctly, I can fit them in a half dozen carton. And then I band it with a rubber band, and those all go to the farmers markets because people just can't believe how big these eggs are. So I'm like, look, I couldn't even close the carton. So people love that. And then I've got the restaurant pack in the flats. Some of my larger eggs will fit in there, so I can package them that way. So it all just depends on who's ordering. just then I know which size I'm gonna pack them.
Any other?
You've got a few more here. Can you discuss some of the insurance coverages and costs related to protecting yourselves? And do you have any recommendations for ag insurance companies?
We just go through our regular broker. It costs us about $1,000 a year. And that covers liability, I think, to $2 million. And then like each of our farmers markets and a couple of our other customers, they want to be additional insured on our policy. So they're just added on. It doesn't cost anything extra for that. And I honestly don't know who we go through with the broker. They just find it for me.
Exactly the same.
Yeah, it's exactly the same too.
Someone else asked, are worms a big issue in your waterfowl? Or you could even comment about other health issues that you guys see common.
I think the biggest problem I get is dang leg issues, just from, their legs are so short and they're big, heavy bodies. So yeah, they get hurt, and then those ones just tend to kind of hang out near the barn. They don't go up to the pond, and then when they're better, they go off and do their thing again. I haven't really had any kind of worm issues. I mean, I'm in the house, like they leave and I get to witness everything that they've left behind. I haven't seen anything troubling.
Are the leg issues when they're growing, or are they at a different time?
It can happen at any time. Yeah, I think that, like right now, one of our houses doesn't necessarily have a ramp, so they have to kind of go down a step. And I think maybe sometimes they kind of tumble down the step or trip over each other. Who knows?
I think ducks are fairly healthy in terms of bird health.
Yeah, we have very few problems with the ducks.
Yeah, and we do, if we do, we try to separate them right away. We have a little poultry infirmary that people move to, and then I call them people, they're not people. They move to, and then usually, I mean, for the most part, they get better, even with the leg issues, but on occasion, but it's so different because mine are around for 7 weeks. Right. So even if they don't get better 100% and they're still healthy, but it's a leg issue, it's still okay. Right. But I've not seen any worm issues at all.
And just to that point on carcass quality, what kind of issues have you noticed with the meat quality?
I mean, to be honest, since we started doing the pecans, they're pretty uniform. I mean, they're like almost 100%, 4 to 6 pounds, like average 5, and they look really great. I mean, on occasion, there's none that, like, sometimes the processor will have their issues, like the leg will break or skin will tear, things like that. But for the most part, what I get back looks great.
And how about organ meat? Is that a thing? People.
It is a thing. Yeah, especially duck liver, definitely. And the processor I can get that separate. That is the one thing, and I can get like the duck gizzards and duck necks. But so for what I will do now is get the liver separate, because I can charge a much higher premium for that. And then the neck and gizzards will get packaged inside and put inside the duck.
Okay.
Yeah.
And on the layer side, when those birds when they're depopulated eventually, what do you do with them? Can you sell them for stewing, or what are the options?
I often just give mine away on Craigslist. There's a gentleman in the back here that I've sold chickens to, and he's on my list for ducks. But yeah, otherwise, if there's people that just need ducks for their pond, I'm like, hey, got some ducks, because they're still fine and they can live several more happy years. They just aren't as useful to me anymore.
I do the same thing. I put an ad on Craigslist, and someone might come and get 2, or they might get 102 or 300. So it's a great way to do it.
So you don't do any of the meat at all at that point?
If it's not economically worth it for the layers, because they're smaller and scrawnier, and I'd have to go down to Stockton, and they wouldn't like it.
Right. There's not enough meat.
Can you describe your customer that buys duck, your target market for How old are they?
I mean, I guess it depends. I mean, the markets themselves attract certain demographics.
Yeah.
So I would say, honestly, for the most part, it's like young hipsters. Because I mean, that's also like the markets that I'm selling at too. So that may be what it is. I mean, you know, I think a lot of people have different opinions about different ethnicities that are more lean towards different poultry, but in my sales, I definitely haven't seen that. I think it's like the younger person who's like more like wanting to cook more and like a little more adventurous in the kitchen, but like, you know, just gonna have dinner party. I don't know. That's what I like. Foodie kind of people is
Yeah, so the type of people that are at the farmer's market already.
exactly.
We get a lot of older people, like my age people, that are buying our duck. I would say that's
great.
maybe they're it's kind of whoever is
It's
selling
cool.
the duck. That's who they're.
Yeah.
So I get all the old people, and, but people that are interested in food and
Interesting.
yeah.
Any other?
Someone had asked Leslie if a loudspeaker making noise would help keep the ravens away. Have you tried anything like that?
It would also, I would worry, I thought about that. The ducks are so sensitive to noise and anything disturbing. I think it would also disturb
Welfare
them
issue.
and put them off their laying and growing.
What, did you have geese?
Yes.
Did you ever have problems with the ravens and the geese?
No.
Because some people at APA, again, I'm just repeating stuff, right? They use geese.
We have. I've got guard geese. No.
Yeah, the one thing I would say though, what's the person in Extension who focuses on predator control? Do you know who I'm talking about, Annie?
I do, but I can't remember the name either.
So I can't remember his name right now, but we do have someone in Cooperative Extension at the UC Davis who does work on predator control, and you know his mantra, among other things, is that unfortunately the fancy stuff doesn't work. Fencing is your best friend, and you know, kind of reducing those kind of magnets. But there is no, unfortunately, there is no silver bullet. But he is a great resource, and if people are interested, they can send an email to us, and we can.
But the two major predators for the ducks, aside from the ravens, it's the bobcats, because the fencing doesn't stop them. They just climb up the pole and they hunt day or night. But that's where the dog has come in helpful. When we have a dog in with the flock, the bobcats stay away. The darn ravens. And the only thing that really helps is if you can get a raven body. And one time I even stopped and saw a dead raven on the side of the road, and I picked it up, you know, really fast, and I brought it out, and then you spread it out, you stake it down in the pasture, and then the ravens, they like, oh my God, and they circle around and they have a fit about this dead raven. And they'll stay away from your ducks for a couple of weeks, maybe 4 weeks. So if you get someone to send you all the dead ravens. There was an ad in some magazine I saw of a woman who was selling fake dead ravens. But I'm sure that those ravens are so smart.
We don't recognize that one.
Yeah.
The other thing we can post too, there's a recent article in a scientific journal that talked about all the different research on predator control, and the one kind of big kind of gestalt kind of message was that we need a lot more studies. The studies are not, the ones that are out there are not really very scientific. So it's really hard to kind of, even from our perspective on the research side, try to provide, you know, what's the best science to you guys. So we've, just from our surveys and how our anecdotal interactions with farmers, that is the number one issue that these type of pastured and free range producers, you know, want addressed and want solutions for. So,
and I can
we're
really
certainly aware of that.
understand why people go to raising ducks in enclosed barns. You wouldn't have those issues, but then I wouldn't be happy. I wouldn't see happy ducks. So I couldn't do that style.
I wonder, we have a lot of ravens, but they never cause us any trouble. Sometimes if the ducks lay an egg outside of the barn after they've been released, the ravens will definitely get the egg. Or if we forget a bucket of eggs, they're gonna eat those. But we also, we get bread from a grocery store once a week that we feed to the chickens. So the ravens are eating bread. And so they're not bothering
We live
the
in
ducks.
Bodega.
It's like, what can you feed them?
And remember the movie?
Yes.
Yeah. Those ravens are still there.
Any other final questions, Todd?
We're out of time.
Okay, so I think we're out of time, but I don't know if you guys are available just for emails and kind of interactions with some of the people that are here or that are via Zoom, so we can make sure people get in touch with each other. And I wanted to thank you guys for driving all the way down here, and hopefully it was helpful for not just the audience, but hopefully for you guys a little too.
Thanks for inviting us.
Thank you.